What if Faith Lehane is the daughter of Samantha Carter? Welcome back to Born into Darkness, Season 2, Episode 2. The Summers Residence, Sunnydale, 2000 hours. Joyce Summers, the mother of both Buffy and Dawn Summers, sat at the dining room, her mouth slightly agape as she stared at Giles, Buffy, Tara, and Willow. Dawn was upstairs in her room, doing her homework as strictly ordered by Joyce after the group had returned from Giles's apartment about 40 minutes ago. Once settled, they had sat down and finally recounted what happened with Major Carter. Hold on, Joyce interjected, struggling to process the information. You're telling me that the Watchers Council stole Faith from her mother when she was a baby, and then gave her to what? The first people they found in a phone book? That I can't answer, Giles admitted heavily, placing his glasses onto the table. I knew that the council would take, or rather, acquire, babies who were identified as potential slayers. It was done so that if they were to get activated as full-fledged slayers, the military couldn't use them as weapons. Like the council does, you mean? Joyce challenged, looking sharply at Giles before turning her gaze to Buffy. So you're telling me that they don't see Buffy as a weapon, even if she's my daughter? At this, Buffy sighed heavily and leaned back in her chair. But I'm not their weapon, Mom, Buffy interjected, her voice tinged with quiet frustration. I don't work for the council, not well, since they refused to help Angel. What? Joyce gasped, caught completely off guard by the revelation. She knew Buffy had been keeping secrets, but this stung. Why would they want to help Angel? What is it that you're not telling me? Mom, Buffy pleaded, looking exhausted. Please, not now. Joyce searched her daughter's face before letting out a defeated sigh. She turned to Giles, demanding an answer to her earlier question about Buffy being treated as a weapon when she was still working for them. Joyce, Giles began softly, his tone full of regret. I don't agree with what they did. I truly don't. However, the prospect of having the military train a slayer and use her not only to fight demons, but also possibly to eliminate enemies of the government is something that the council deeply fears. But it's still not right, Mr. Giles, Tara murmured softly, and Giles offered a solemn nod. I never said it was, Giles responded quietly, but I never thought that Faith would be one of those girls. I'm sorry about Faith, Willow chimed in, looking up anxiously from her laptop, but she still killed two people. Right, Buff? Willow? Buffy? Joyce asked, her confusion morphing into dread. Who did she kill? Remember Deputy Mayor Finch? The police who came by and questioned me about him? Buffy asked as Joyce nodded slowly, watching her intently. And remember that article about the professor who was stabbed and then had his throat cut? That was Faith? Joyce whispered, horrified, as Willow and Buffy both nodded. She tried to pin it on me, Buffy confessed, glancing briefly at Giles before looking back at her mother. I tried to talk her into turning herself in. I told her that she killed someone and that there had to be a price to pay, but she didn't want to, and maybe if I had forced her to go to police, or we were discussing the matter in my office, Giles interrupted gently, recalling the day Faith had come to him claiming Buffy was the responsible party. And I believe Wesley overheard us. He contacted the council, and a special operations team tried to forcefully take her back to England that night. Tried? Joyce questioned, her voice deceptively calm. Beneath the surface, she was furious that she was only hearing about these dangerous events just now. She escaped, Buffy explained. We went to look for her and, well, I found her. She was down at the port, getting ready to leave the country. I tried to bring her back, but we were attacked by vampires. Long story short, she saved my life. But she joined the mayor soon after, Giles added grimly. He suddenly went rigid, looking over Joyce's shoulder toward the front door as a heavy knock echoed through the house. The doorbell rang a second later. Rising from her chair, Joyce paced cautiously toward the foyer, with Giles and the others trailing close behind her. Remembering the Scooby's repeated warnings never to welcome anyone she didn't recognize into the house, Joyce opened the front door just a crack. Standing on the porch was a dark-haired man in his early 40s, dressed in a sharp black suit and trousers, wearing a polite smile. Glancing just to his left, Joyce spotted a young, dark-haired woman around 17 years old. The girl stood with her hands planted firmly on her hips, clad in jeans, a red t-shirt, and a blue jacket. Yes? Joyce inquired, eyeing the man warily. Joyce Summers. My name is Richard Atwood from the Watchers Council of Great Britain. I was wondering if you... Atwood trailed off as Giles stepped into view behind the door, followed closely by Buffy, Willow, and Tara as they widened the door open. Ah, Mr. Giles, I presume. Atwood amended, shifting his focus to the older man. Yes? Giles replied stiffly. I stopped by your apartment to speak, but since you weren't in, I figured you might be found here. You do realize I don't work for the council anymore, Buffy interjected, stepping forward defensively. So I don't need another watcher. Miss Summers? Atwood asked, as Buffy nodded, a smirk played on his lips. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not your watcher. He's mine, the young woman declared. She scanned Buffy from head to toe, shaking her head critically before looking up at Atwood. This is Buffy the Slayer? Excuse me? Buffy snapped, throwing a bewildered glance back at Willow and Tara before glaring at the newcomer. Miss Buffy Summers, Atwood introduced smoothly, gesturing to his companion. Meet Kennedy Roberts, the newest Slayer. Joyce looked anxiously over at Giles, who was nervously adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose. Beside him, Buffy stood tall, her eyes narrowing as she locked gaze with Atwood and Kennedy. May we come in? Atwood asked. Giles then asked Willow to grab the holy water to make sure that the two people on the front porch weren't vampires. Once Willow handed the bottle of holy water to Giles, he promptly sprayed it on them. He watched the new watcher close his eyes in annoyance, while the young woman next to him complained that the liquid was staining her designer jacket. However, their bodies neither smoked nor burst into flames. Relieved, Giles nodded at Joyce, who formally invited them in. Thank you, Atwood expressed smoothly as Joyce ushered him toward the living room. Meanwhile, Kennedy stepped inside, raising an eyebrow at Buffy before eyeing the two girls standing behind her. Pushing past the older Slayer, Kennedy approached Willow while biting her bottom lip. Hello, she purred. Hi, Willow replied nervously, giving Kennedy a little wave. I'm Willow, and this is Tara. Hi, Tara offered quietly as the newest Slayer glanced at her, then quickly back at the redhead. I think I'm gonna like staying in this town, Kennedy declared, smirking at a visibly confused Willow, until Buffy firmly tapped her on the shoulder. Sighing and rolling her eyes at Willow, Kennedy turned around to face Buffy, who demanded to know what she meant by staying in this town. Buffy, Giles called out from the living room. Could you come in here, please? You'll see, Kennedy teased, glancing from Buffy back to Willow before offering the redhead a quick wink. Kennedy then turned and strolled into the living room, followed closely by an ever befuddled Buffy. Left alone in the foyer at the foot of the staircase, the redhead looked at Tara in utter bewilderment, silently asking her what just happened. I think she just hit on you, Tara smiled, noting the wide-eyed expression on Willow's face, the exact same look that she privately always found so cute. However, Tara reminded herself that Willow was still with Oz, who was currently in Seattle performing with his band. I I think we should go in too. Tara and Willow made their way into the living room and found Atwood and Kennedy seated next to each other on the couch. Joyce and Giles occupied the armchairs, while Buffy stood defensively behind her mother with her arms folded tightly over her chest. Having no other place to sit down, Tara and Willow leaned against the wall as the new watcher began to speak. As you know, Atwood began, leaning forward to look directly at Giles and Buffy. Miss Summers has already relinquished her role as a Slayer, and... No, I haven't, Buffy countered sharply. I just don't work for the council anymore. Yes, Atwood conceded smoothly, his eyes locked on Buffy. But now you don't have every resource that the Council provides behind you, whereas Kennedy does. And given that she's the Slayer recognized by the Council, you, and respectfully Mr. Giles, are not to interfere in her official Slayer duties. And no, Buffy snapped. Excuse me? Kennedy asked, glaring up at Buffy with deep derision. No, Buffy repeated firmly as Joyce glanced back at her with concern. The council knew what was going on with the Ascension even before I quit, didn't they? That's not the point. Atwood attempted to interject, but Buffy cut him off. They knew, she insisted passionately. I know Wesley told them, and they did absolutely nothing to help. One of our strongest warriors was down, and they refused to assist. The council does not provide aid to vampires, and I'm not done, Buffy interrupted calmly, though her voice carried a dangerous edge as Willow and Tara looked on. We managed to save him in the nick of time before. By trying to kill Faith? Atwood challenged, causing Joyce's eyes to widen in shock. Joyce quickly looked at Giles, who merely closed his eyes in grim confirmation. She then turned her gaze back to Buffy, whose jaw was locked in tight anger before she noticed her mother's reaction. So, Mrs. Summers, you didn't know? Atwood asked, a note of triumph in his voice. I did what I had to do to save this world, Buffy stated defensively. She caught a painful glimpse of disappointment in Joyce's eyes, which only made her glare harder at Atwood. And you know what? People died, but we beat the mayor. Don't come to my city and tell me not to interfere in your so-called official Slayer business. Buffy, Giles intervened, looking back at the blonde, then at Joyce, before finally addressing Atwood. We have 2 Slayers in the city, and more than enough demons and vampires to go around. Coupled with potential apocalypses because of the Hellmouth, we will need both of them working together. Very well, I believe the Council will agree to that, Atwood agreed stiffly. But all Council intelligence comes through me. If I deem any information pertinent to whatever it is that Kennedy faces, then I'll relay it to you. We have our own ways of gathering information, Giles countered, nodding subtly toward a faintly smiling Willow and Tara. Ah yes, Atwood said dryly, standing up and sliding his hands into his pockets. We've heard about the help your amateur witches provided Miss Summers. But from now on, everything that you find goes through me and Kennedy and... No, Buffy rejected flatly, moving to stand protectively in front of Willow and Tara. You don't get to come into my home and make demands. You don't want to share council intelligence? So be it, but don't expect us to... Buffy, Joyce warned softly. No, Mom, Buffy insisted, looking briefly over her shoulder before turning her full, defiant attention back to Atwood. How about this? Any intelligence I get from my friends, if any of it is, what was it you said, pertinent to you or Kennedy, I'll make sure you get it, on my terms. Let's everyone calm down, Giles urged, rising to his feet and stepping toward Buffy to gently pull her back. He then turned his gaze to Atwood, his voice turning firm. You cannot expect to give us only bits and pieces of information on whatever threats we face, while on the other hand, expecting us to hand over every single piece of information we come across. Atwood glanced toward Tara and Willow, sighing heavily before stepping back. He turned to Buffy, his expression tight. Kennedy will accompany you when you go patrolling. It wasn't long before Atwood requested another meeting with Giles for the following day, which Giles granted with a tense nod. Meanwhile, Kennedy approached Willow, a forward smirk playing on her lips. Hey, want to grab some coffee tomorrow morning? Willow stammered, shifting uncomfortably as Tara stood close by her side. She glanced nervously toward Atwood, who was now occupied talking to Buffy. I'm sorry, but I already have someone, and... It's just coffee, Kennedy interrupted smoothly, flashing a confident smile. Tara? Willow said, her eyes widening in a silent plea for help as she looked at her friend. Wanna have coffee with us tomorrow? Sure, Tara replied softly. As she spoke, she caught a glimpse of Kennedy's aura, watching the colors shift into a sharp, resentful hue. Okay, she's pissed off, Tara thought to herself. Sensing the mounting tension, the two of them quickly excused themselves and left the Summers home. They left Buffy and the others behind, their minds swirling with a chaotic mess of unanswered questions. The moment the front door clicked shut, Joyce turned to Buffy, her face pale with shock, and asked her point blank, "What did Atwood mean when he said that you killed Faith?" Faith's room, SGC 1100 hours. Faith slowly opened her eyes to find herself in a strange room. It didn't take long for the Slayer to realize she was in the larger quarters she had been brought to last night, the very room where Major Carter had revealed her true identity. Carter was her mother, and Faith was the daughter she had believed dead for years. Closing her eyes tightly, Faith prayed against hope that the previous night hadn't been a cruel trick of her imagination. She desperately wanted to believe she had a real mother and a real family. Rolling over in the bed to look at the other side, she hoped to find the Major resting there. Her heart sank, however, when she realized she was entirely alone in the mattress. She sat up slowly and scanned the floor, half hoping to spy a sleeping bag in the dimly lit room. There was no one there. Even the table where they had shared the pizza last night sat completely bare. Maybe it was just a dream, Faith thought despondently. She brought her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms tightly around them. I'm supposed to be the tough Slayer, take no BS. But instead, I fall apart in a dream. Maybe, maybe that's how I know it wasn't real. The way I broke down it was so unlike me. Faith looked around the empty, yet neatly furnished room until her eyes settled on a piece of paper propped against the telephone. Reaching out to retrieve it, she unfolded the note and her lips trembled into a fragile smile as she read the words, "Ellie, the base commander wanted to see me about an issue with one of our satellites. I didn't want to wake you since you seem to be sleeping so peacefully. I'll be back as fast as I can. With love, Mom. Or at least I hope you'll call me Mom. P.S. My dear Ali, I got back about an hour ago, 1000 hours or 10 a.m., and you were still asleep. I'm still not going to disturb your rest. I'm heading to the bank because I have a surprise for you. Be back soon, Mom." Mom, Faith thought, clutching the paper tightly as she slipped off the bed. She flipped the light switch next to the door, wincing and blinking as the sudden brightness stung her eyes. Rubbing them quickly, she looked around the room again, this time noticing a rolled up sleeping bag tucked neatly next to a chest of drawers. Mom, she repeated internally, an old bitterness creeping into her chest. The last time I said that word, the last time was before I ran away from that drunk bitch. Stop it. Damn it, Faith. You saw the DNA results. Sabrina Lehane is not your mother. She's not. But, but I'm so broken. Oh God, what if this mom decides that I'm too damaged and... No, she doesn't think like that. Does she? No, she doesn't. She said she loves me, but, I mean, lost in the spiral of her own thoughts as she stood by the drawers, Faith didn't hear the gentle knock on the door. She remained completely unaware when the blonde officer peeked her head inside, stepped quietly into the room, and closed the door softly behind her. "Ellie?" Sam asked gently. Faith spun around, her eyes wide, still clutching the letter in her trembling hand. "I," she began, struggling to find the words to voice the terror gripping her soul. "I'm I'm so broken." "Ellie?" Sam repeated, her voice thick with maternal concern as she advanced toward her daughter. Faith instinctively took a step back, her defenses going up even as her heart fractured. "I'm so broken that she closed her eyes and shook her head, fighting a losing battle against the tears welling in her eyes. Looking back up at the Major, she whispered, "I don't think I can be fixed. And if you find out, I mean, I'm afraid that you'll just let me go when you realize I'm not the girl you've been wanting all this time." "You are my daughter," Sam said fiercely, her own eyes shining with emotion. She closed the distance between them, gently taking hold of Faith's arms to anchor her. "No matter what has happened, or what will happen, we will deal with it together. I've always dreamed about you, and about what I would do if you were alive. I might make some mistakes along the way, but that will never mean that I don't want you. Never. If you hadn't been taken from me, I already told you that I don't know how things would have turned out, remember? Faith could only nod silently, her fingers loosening enough to let the piece of paper slip from her grasp and flutter to the floor. There's something I want to show you, Sam murmured softly. Faith watched through a blur of tears as the Major reached into her jeans pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. Guiding Faith back over to the bed, Sam sat down beside her, carefully withdrew an ultrasound picture from the envelope and handed it to her daughter. That's you, Carter murmured softly as Faith stared down at the ultrasound scan. Faith looked back up at Carter, her eyes wide with disbelief, before looking down at the image once more, her mouth hanging slightly open. Her eyes tracked up to the name printed across the top of the page. It was Carter's name. Carter, Samantha, stamped alongside the original date. You're my daughter, Ellie. Nothing will change how I feel about you. You're the one I want. No matter what happened in your past, you are the one I want. And no, I'm not going to let you go. That's never going to happen. You are my blood. Do you understand me? My blood without Naquita, but my blood nevertheless. Carter thought to herself, quiet wave of fierce protection washing over her. Faith stared at the Major, a heavy silence settling between them, before she gave a slow, tentative nod and looked back down at the scan. Can I keep this? Faith asked, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. Yes, the Major replied gently, leaning down to press a tender kiss against the side of Faith's forehead. Of course you can. I just hope that I can make you proud of me. I mean, there'll be times when I may embarrass you in front of others, and Faith offered the Major a faint, genuine smile. Seeing the tension break, the older blonde stood up and held out her hand invitingly. The mess hall usually has some cookies and cakes set out while they're getting ready for the lunch crowd. Major Carter noted with a warm smile. Feel up to having a bite? After that, we have a scheduled meeting with General Hammond and Major Davis. They'll need to ask you some questions about what occurred in Sunnydale. But I promise I'll be sitting right by your side. Then, once we are finished with that, I'd like to have a full physical done on you. The Slayer hesitated, fear momentarily flashing in her dark eyes as the Major crouched back down to meet her gaze directly. We know about what happened to you in Boston, the Major explained softly, her voice thick with empathy. Faith closed her eyes tight and gave a sharp nod, her shoulders tensing. I would like full physical done with a comprehensive battery of blood tests. All right, Faith interjected softly. 20 minutes later, after Faith had showered and changed into fresh clothes, the both of them made their way towards the mess hall. Over coffee and cake, Faith began probing into the Major's background. As the dark haired Slayer listened, her street smart instincts kicked in. She could tell the blonde was deliberately holding back or smoothing over certain details of her life, particularly regarding her true duties at the Pentagon and the nature of the subterranean facility they were currently occupying. 30 minutes passed before they finished their snacks. The older blonde then guided her daughter down to the nerve center of the SGC on the 27th floor. Stepping into the briefing room from the corridor, Faith took in her surroundings. A metal staircase wound down to the control room below. A massive steel blast door currently shielded a large window, and a grand red conference table dominated the center of the room. At the head of that table stood General Hammond in his crisp dress blues, accompanied by a man she hadn't met yet. Both men turned to face them as they entered. Sir, Major Carter announced, placing her hand supportively on Faith's shoulders. Major Davis, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Ellie Faith Carter. Ellie? The Major said, gesturing toward the two officers, introducing Hammond as the base commander and Davis as the Pentagon's liaison for the Deep Space Telemetry program. Faith offered a guarded nod as Hammond courteously motioned for everyone to take a seat. The general claimed his spot at the head of the table, with Davis seating himself on one side. Carter sat directly next to Faith on the opposite side, offering a reassuring presence. Ellie, Hammond began, his tone grave as Faith focused on him. The reason we are here is, Sir, Sergeant Walter Harriman interrupted, hurriedly ascending the metal stairs from the control room below to whisper urgently into the general's ear. Faith and the major exchanged a tense, questioning glance. Walter stepped back as the general looked up, a flash of profound surprise crossing his features before he locked eyes with Major Davis. Major, the general ordered, remembering the name of the ruthless head of the Watchers Council. Contact the Pentagon immediately. I want to know exactly who gave clearance for Quentin Travers to enter this mountain. What? Faith gasped, snapping to her feet, her hands curled into tight fists as she glared bitterly at Major Carter and the officers. You lied to me. Damn it, you lied to me when I actually believed you. Stupid. Ellie, no, Carter cried, rising instantly to restrain Faith as Davis and Hammond watched the sudden outburst with growing concern. Ellie, please look at me. You faked the DNA test, Faith spat out, her voice dripping with betrayal. Carter closed her eyes in pain, shaking her head vigorously. No, the picture, Ellie. I gave you that ultrasound image. It was in my locker at the bank. That was truly you. I have absolutely no reason to lie to you about something this important. Walter, General Hammond commanded sharply, nodding to Major Davis to signal that he should proceed with contacting his Pentagon sources. I want 3 airmen up here immediately to escort Miss Carter back to her quarters and no, no, Faith protested, shaking her head wildly as Major Carter held her firmly, pleading with her to trust the bond they had just formed. Carter begged Faith not to let them drive a wedge between them, promising that she wouldn't let anyone take her away. Desperate to ground the girl, Carter asked Faith to hand over the ultrasound photo again, turning it so the text faced her. That's my name right there, Ellie, Carter pointed out, her finger trembling slightly against the top of the image. This is you. You are mine, and I will not let anyone take you away from me. Sir, an airman announced, arriving at the top of the stairs after being dispatched by Walter from the control room. The general turned to address the security detail while Faith caught the raw expression on Carter's face, a painful, aching mixture of deep hurt and profound anxiety. Seeing that vulnerability in Carter completely broke the Slayer's defenses. I'm supposed to be the tough Slayer, the kick-ass Slayer, Faith thought to herself, a sharp, suffocating ache tightening in her chest. No, Faith whispered softly, locking her eyes onto Major Carter's before turning a determined gaze toward Hammond and Davis. I want to stay. Ellie, Carter breathed, her eyes widening. Faith looked back at her with a fierce, burning resolve. They took me away from you. They took me away, and I want to look that man in the eyes when he's forced to admit what he did. Faith turned her attention back to the base commander. General, I need you to remain completely calm, Miss Carter. Hammond countered, noting how tightly the young woman's hands were clenched, her knuckles turning stark white under the pressure. We are entirely prepared to protect you, but we cannot help you if you lose control and attack him. Ellie, Carter pleaded softly, looking down at her daughter's tense hands. I need you to calm down for me. Faith drew in a long, ragged breath, slowly forcing her fingers to uncurl. As Carter quietly reminded her that rebuilding trust would take time, Hammond signaled the airmen to take up defensive positions at the top of the metallic staircase. A moment later, Walter buzzed up with an update. Travers and 2 of his operatives had already cleared the surface lobby. Simultaneously, Davis hung up his phone, his expression grim. Sir, their security clearances are completely legitimate, Davis reported in a hushed tone. They have administrative authority to enter the facility. What exactly do they know about our operations? Hammond asked, pulling Davis a few paces away from the table to speak privately. Whoever signed off on this clearance at the Pentagon has absolutely no idea what actually goes on down here, sir, Davis clarified. Well, that lets a few of our people off the hook, Hammond grunted, his jaw tight. But I still want a full investigation into how they managed to secure that level of clearance in the first place. Understood, sir, Davis nodded, accepting the directive to dig deeper into the security breach the moment they wrapped up the current crisis. Carter stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with her daughter. Sir, she will hold her temper. I promise you. Very well, Hammond agreed quietly. They all turned their attention toward the briefing room entrance, waiting for Travers to descend to the 27th floor, bracing for the imminent confrontation between a ruthless council leader and a mother whose baby had been stolen so many years ago. To be continued.